to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It's Thursday, March 21st, 2013. Sure happy it's Thursday, sure happy. Actually, that's not really true. This is a very depressing day and a very depressing time, I think, that we're all having to deal with all the stuff that's going on here. I'm looking at the corporate media, and they're talking about, oh, it's March Madness and basketball. Twitter turned 7. Man, they are so fluffy. It is just really amazing. And then they wonder why they're losing audience and why the public doesn't think they're actually being fully informed by the corporate media so they can make good choices. Big news, Cyprus is still very much in turmoil. The deposit haircut, the looting of private citizens' deposit accounts to save the banks is back on the table. The Cyprus government has ordered all of the Cyprus banks to stay shut until next week. They're talking about letting them open on the 26th as possible, and they're going back to again talk about taking money out of ordinary depositors' accounts to come up with the 6.5 billion euro cash that the European Central Bank is demanding has to happen first before the European Central Bank will bail out the Cyprus banks. And the European Central Bank, first of all, it was a huge mistake. It's already having repercussions around the world. And the European Union and the European Central Bank are taking this hardline attitude. They're demanding that the president of Cyprus ignore his own people, ignore his own parliament. They are putting all kinds of blocks and impositions around a possible deal with Russia. And, of course, being a member of the European Union, Cyprus can't go back to its own currency. And it really has put Cyprus between the rock and the hard place. Basically, the European Central Bank is blackmailing Cyprus to rob the people, or they will simply cut off Cyprus completely and let it collapse and default. It's a very, very hardline approach to this problem. Now, we are getting word that the Cyprus Popular Bank, one of the nation's largest, is down to the last few hours of liquidity. They're still allowing very limited withdrawals from the ATMs. Credit card transactions are not being authorized. And we're hearing all of this crazy stuff that's coming out through channels that are well outside the corporate media. Rioting has already begun. TV station CYBC is reporting that police in the Cyprus capital are scuffling, there is the word they're using, with protesters, including the employees of the Cyprus Popular Bank. And more protesters are gathering, so it's looking very, very ugly. Meanwhile, the Cyprus government has come out with their latest idea to try and find that 11th marble. They're talking about the Investment Solidarity Fund. Huzzah, huzzah, huzzah. And so President Nikos Anastasiadis is putting forward this, what he's calling his Plan B, which is that since the Cyprus people have refused to allow the government to take their savings, those same people will gladly hand that cash over freely if he just asks real nice. And I think that betrays the desperation of the situation. So the European Central Bank is saying, give us your depositors' cash or we're just going to cut you off completely. That's basically the attitude that they're taking. And this is a classic example of why Adam Smith was wrong about personal greed moving the entire system forward. And Nobel Prize winning mathematician John Nash, they made a movie about him, The Beautiful Mind, was absolutely right. You've got to maintain an overview of the system as a whole to move it forward. When we come back from these commercials, I will explain why. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're talking about the money junkies. And just to do a brief recap on this before I describe how it applies to our current situation. Adam Smith was an economic theorist who, in general terms, said that if everybody is looking out for their own profitability, that the system as a whole would move forward. Now, with this trend into planned obsolescence, in which we, the working class people of the world, are working as hard as we can just to stay where we are, obviously Adam Smith was wrong. And Nobel Prize winning mathematician John Nash, in his doctoral dissertation, proved that if you are not keeping an overview of the system as a whole, it will eventually lock up from the Adam Smith approach. But of course, the money junkies, they don't want to talk about John Nash. They want to go to Adam Smith because it justifies personal greed. And like, if you've ever seen a drug addict, you know, somebody who's an alcoholic or heroin addict or whatever, they're always trying to come up with justifications and rationalizations why they don't really have a problem. It's just their free choice and so forth and so on here. But we're seeing that here. The money junkies are listening only to their own addiction to other people's money with this renewed demand and blackmail and refusal to allow Cyprus to seek other possible solutions with Russia, to force the government of Cyprus to loot the savings account of the Cyprus people. There are only two possible outcomes from this course of action. In the first, the people of Cyprus stand firm and the Cyprus banks collapse. In the second, the looting of citizens' bank accounts go forward, there's rioting and runs on the banks, and the Cyprus banks collapse. Either way, the Cyprus banks are going to collapse. They're doomed. And this means this will trigger the credit default swaps sold against Cyprus debts, and the sellers of those derivatives do not have the cash reserves to make good on it. Now, based on past history here in the United States, Wall Street will turn to the federal government, and the federal government will try to loot the savings accounts of the American people to allow Wall Street to make good on the derivatives. There are only two possible outcomes from this course of action. In the first, the people of the United States stands firm, and Wall Street collapses. In the second, the looting of American citizens' bank accounts go forward. There's rioting and runs on the banks, and Wall Street collapses anyway. There's only one solution out of this mess, because there is no 11th marble. The only solution to this mess is the Andrew Jackson, Abraham Lincoln, John F. Kennedy approach. It is time to shut down the private central banks everywhere on the globe, because they are the common enemy of all mankind. Private central banks do not exist to serve the community, the people, or the nation. They serve only themselves. By design, they produce more debt than money with which to pay the debt in order to permanently enslave the population, to transfer the wealth of that enslaved population into the pockets of the private central bankers, and all it takes to do it is ink and paper and your belief that this is the way life is supposed to be. Now, the Cyprus bank shutdown is already having repercussions because many nations, because of favorable fees and regulatory structures, used the Cyprus banks to conduct their business, including the government of Russia. That's one of the reasons they're stepping in here and offering a solution, because Russia uses the Cyprus banks to interface with Europe and even to conduct some of their own internal financing. So this lockup of the Cyprus banks is starting to impact all over Europe and all over Russia. Payroll can't be met. Money cannot be moved to where it needs to go. And so the infection from Cyprus is already spreading. Russia is threatening to dump their euros in exchange for gold. Good luck finding any. And the contagion is definitely spreading. Over at King World News, they're talking about where's it going to fall next, because now that this first domino is falling in Cyprus, it's not going to stop there. And Jim Sinclair was over on King World News saying the concept that our financial leaders are in some sense geniuses, able to foresee the future and calculate every move based on their ability to divine what will be the result of their actions, is absolutely false. The IMF has made a massive, massive mistake here. And they're trapped by their illusion of infallibility. They won't go back. They won't say we goofed. This may turn out to be the fatal misstep that brings that whole global network of private central banks crashing down. And the world would be so much better off without them. Going back to government-issued currency that circulates through commerce without accruing interest to a private banker. And remember, it's all just ink and paper. And you are held in this servitude. You are held in this slavery because you've been brainwashed to believe that this is the only way economies can run. And we know from history that is not true. This nation, the United States of America, fought a revolution to break free of a private central bank issuing the public currency as a loan at interest, only to have our corruptible and corrupted Congress and presidents sell us back into that slavery 3 times. And if you're out there saying, oh, well, that's Cyprus's problem, no, it isn't. Because the downside of globalism is that an economic crisis in one part of the world becomes a global catastrophe. That's what happened in 2008 with the collapse of the mortgage-backed securities bubble. It wasn't just a Wall Street problem. Wall Street had been selling these bundles to Credit Suisse and Deutsche Bank and the Bank of Libya all over the place. And all of this talk about repurchasing toxic assets by the U.S. government, that's politician code speak for having to buy back all this worthless paper that was peddled all over the world. Globalism is why the mortgage-backed security fraud became a global problem. And now we have, and this is being reported over at silverdoctors.com, Ben Bernanke is now saying depositor looting, they're calling it haircuts to try and make it sound like it's trivial. But Bernanke is now saying that yes, it is possible, it will happen here in the United States if events in Europe become contagious. And they cannot help but become contagious because of those credit default swaps Wall Street recklessly sold against Europe's debt, secure in their belief that they would never come due. Same mistake AIG made. The total derivative exposure by Wall Street is over $90 trillion, which I could cover with this one paper note from Zimbabwe that's worth $100 trillion. U.S. value 90 cents, I might add. So Bernanke is basically warning you right now, when the Cyprus banks default and those credit default swaps come due, they're already looking at looting your bank accounts to cover the losses. Even more dangerous, over at Daily Bail, they've got a video in which Ben Bernanke is admitting the Federal Reserve doesn't really have any idea how much money they've given to the banks. The system is completely out of control. And if you want to talk about insanity, remember the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different outcome? Remember back in 1999 when Congress repealed Glass-Steagall and started this firestorm of reckless game playing on Wall Street? Over at libertyblitzkrieg.com, they're reporting Congress is getting ready to further deregulate Wall Street. They're going to take off the last of the paper chains that are supposed to be holding these banks in check. It's runaway looting. Remember, the last official act of any government is to loot the nation. It is well underway. Cyprus is doing it. New Zealand's talking about doing it. Italy's talking about doing it. And now Ben Bernanke is admitting it can happen here. If the Europe contagion spreads here, and because the globalists knock down those safety barriers between economies called national borders, of course it's going to come here. Just like a fire in an office building where you've blocked open the fire doors is going to spread to the entire building. Now we're hearing mixed signals about whether or not this deal with Russia is going to move forward. The European Union doesn't want to deal with Russia and Cyprus. The United States certainly doesn't. Russia is asking and getting all kinds of concessions if they come in to save the Cyprus banks. They want natural gas exploration rights around Cyprus, and now they're asking for one of Cyprus's naval ports that the German Navy currently occupies. And the deal is if Russia succeeds in coming in and propping up Cyprus, Cyprus will probably leave the European Union. That's also going to trigger credit default swaps. Russia will have natural gas exploration around Cyprus. They'll be justified in having a military presence there to protect their strategic interests, and they will have a port on Cyprus. The German Navy will be given 3 months to get out, and the Eastern Mediterranean is going to become a Russian zone. This is what happens when you take a policy of making deals, when the United States is out there trying to make wars to solve their economic problems. This is very, very dangerous. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Manny is sitting in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, and ready to answer your calls when you call on in. And again, to reiterate, the common sense advice we are always sharing with our listeners. You should have no more money in the bank than you need to cover your obligations, and you should have the rest under your control. If you have not yet put some of your surplus cash into silver and gold, go over to Republic Trading Group. Now is the time to do it. Because we're hearing Popular Bank in Cyprus has just hours of liquidity left. No solution in sight. Bernanke openly saying that, yes, if the Europe contagion spreads to the U.S., and it has to, that they're considering doing the same here in the United States of America. So keep your money under your own control. Get it into something that is not the dollar and certainly not the euro. Getting into the silver and gold or tantalum or even copper, anything. Or just, maybe now's the time to buy something you've always wanted, because the way inflation is taking hold of our economy, prices are going through the roof. And you're better off buying that little luxury now than waiting and looking at buying it 2 months down the road when it'll cost twice as much. After the show today, I'm going to go down to my bank and take out my $1.37 that I have been sitting on surplus in there and bring it home and put it in my cookie jar. Anyway, we're getting this from Wall Street Journal. U.S. stocks extended losses following mishmash of economic reports. They don't want to talk about what's going on over there in Cyprus. They're listing all these other excuses why people are getting nervous. Looking at the corporate media, they've spent pretty much all morning, if they're not talking about Twitter's birthday and the start of basketball season, it's all about Obama and Netanyahu and Israel, and Obama pledging undying support and extended military support for Israel. Obama did get up in front of the crowd and say the Palestinians deserve a state of their own, which is Obama's payback to Netanyahu for Netanyahu's support of Mitt Romney last year. But I don't think Obama's really committed to that idea. He's just playing little political tit for tat. But the corporate media doesn't want you thinking about what's happening in Europe, what's happening in Cyprus, and all these other countries that are already saying, yeah, we may have to do the same thing. We may have to rob the poor to give to the rich. As opposed to Robin Hood, who robs the rich because the poor didn't have anything. Now, an interesting little article, and it almost sounds like it's a trick question. Over at The Guardian, they're saying, can the United States trust the European Union after the Cyprus debacle? And it does sound like a trick question. In an era where bank fraud is on open display, nobody should trust anybody in a three-piece suit and a labeled parking space at the local bank. It's just amazing. Over at HSBC, Europe's biggest bank by market value, they're getting ready to lay off thousands more people because they're running out of liquidity. It's all starting to come down. They're scrambling around for that 11th marble, and they can't find it. They still believe it's out there somewhere. They still believe there's an 11th marble out there. They won't look in a mirror and realize that private central banking by design must collapse. Throughout history, it's always collapsed in just one nation or the other, or been torn down and kicked out in just one nation or another, like it was in the United States when the country first started. And then the rest of the nations with private central banks will make war on it to bring private central banking back in. That's what caused the War of 1812. Congress refused to renew the charter for the first bank of the United States. The Rothschilds literally threatened the United States government, if you do not renew our charter, we will start a war. Congress said no. Next year, Britain attacked. because their private central bank offered to finance the reconquest and colonization of the Americas at very, very low, attractive interest rates. You need to go out and look at my article, All Wars Are Banker Wars. And by the way, that has gone viral. I'm getting phone calls from people I haven't talked to in years, emails from people I haven't seen in months, who are stumbling across this on sites not my own. Investment Watch blog picked it up. People have a resonance with what's laid out in there, and they finally begin to see that pattern of why ever since private central banking took over the world, wars on a grand scale are inevitable, because wars are the bankers' richest harvest. And as I share all of this information about what's going on in Cyprus, you can look at the corporate media and see how hard they're trying to push this war forward. Got to go into Syria, got to go into Lebanon, got to deal with all these upstart terrorists, freedom-hating, anti-Semite, fascist, commie, whatever name they can come up with. Here in the United States of America, up in Chicago, they've just announced they're going to have to close 50 schools. That's a lot of schools, even for a city the size of Chicago. The minorities are already screaming that the schools identified as closing are pretty much in the minority neighborhoods. Seems to be true. Going to take a break. We'll be right back. Join us on the air. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I'm watching on the corporate media where Israel's top sociopathic money junkie is pinning Israel's highest award onto the lapel of our nation's top sociopathic money junkie. And it means about as much as his Nobel Peace Prize as well. We're going to go to the phones. Lynn in Washington. Aloha, Lynn. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thanks, Mike. Hey, you know, that article on Bankers' Wars was absolutely wonderful, but do you know who was really promoting it the other night was Jeff Rentz.
Well,
he mentioned it, and he said it was one of the finest articles on the subject that he had seen.
Well, my hat's off to Jeff Rentz, and I think a lot of people are starting to pull together. And I don't want to say that this is some wonderful thing that I personally have come up with. All I did was I drew together the available facts, and I think the popularity of the article is because people reading it understood that at some level inside, they already knew it to be true. They just didn't have a framework to hang it on. And so thanks to Jeff for mentioning it. And it really did take off. It's almost caught me by surprise how far it's gone.
Well, you did a wonderful job of putting it together in a way that people could understand it and connect the dots.
Well, thank you very much for those kind words. Anything else you'd like to talk about?
No, I think I'm going to leave it up to you. You're doing a wonderful job doing it.
Well, thank you very much. And
thanks, Mike.
We're going to let you go here. Over in our chat room at whatreallyhappened.com, somebody made a comment. Excuse me, I have a bit of a cold today. Somebody made a comment that the government might decide to confiscate land, and it's not beyond the bounds of possibility. Well, this has already been done. I mean, we all know about the foreclosure fraud where the government literally indemnified the banks and investment houses and mortgage companies for all the illegal activity to grab Americans' houses. It's wealth confiscation, done in a way to make the homeowners think it was their own fault they had lost their equity. That's just one example. You need to go all the way back to 1971 when Nixon ended gold convertibility of the U.S. dollar. And it turned out there was not enough gold held by Fort Knox to collateralize the United States borrowing, which was still out of control even back then. And so Richard Nixon created the Environmental Protection Agency that was sold to America as preserving our wilderness and resource-rich areas for future generations. But actually what Nixon was doing, he was cordoning off America's public lands, your national parks, your wilderness areas, all of that was locked away from you, the American people who own it, and pledged as collateral for further government borrowing. And they came up with all these different programs, roadless areas, wetlands, heritage zone, all the rest of that stuff to break it into little tiny pieces to conceal the scale of the public land confiscation. And if you put it all together under the guise of environmentalism and taking care of nature, more than 1/3 of the nation is now pledged as collateral on the U.S. government's debt. I don't recall reading anything in the Constitution that authorizes them to do that. And the 10th Amendment forbids them from simply assuming that authority. So the reality is the U.S. government and the bankers have been stealing your land all along, most recently with the foreclosure fraud. Robo-signing, phony documents, foreclosing on homes that didn't even have a mortgage with that bank, or in some cases didn't even have a mortgage at all. Because that monthly payment you're writing isn't enough to keep the bank solvent. They need the entire value of your home on their books right now. And that was what precipitated this huge foreclosure fraud. And every attorney general in every of the 50 states started criminal investigations, and the Obama administration came in and arm-twisted them and said, no, you will not investigate, you will not prosecute, you will not try, you will not convict, you will not jail. We'll take care of it. And the Obama administration basically said we will have a foreclosure settlement where these banks that made so much money stealing your homes turned over pennies on the dollar to the government, who then supposedly handed it out to the states and homeowners. In reality, the states took that money to cover their own budget shortfalls, and homeowners who, through fraud and criminality by Wall Street, lost their homes got maybe $1,000 or $2,000 in compensation for it. That's the scale of the criminality here. Now, getting back to the situation, the corporate media is totally focused on Obama in Israel and how great he's going to be for Israel. And they've been just pounding this issue, Iranian nukes, Iranian nukes, Iranian nukes, Iranian nukes. And Obama's out there vowing to prevent a nuclear Iran, saying that his administration remains committed to do what is necessary to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. So, to recap, Israel, a nation with a proven history of belligerence toward its neighbors, has never signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty or allowed IAEA inspectors into its facilities. This means that every penny of your tax money the U.S. federal government sends to Israel is a criminal violation of the Symington Amendment to the Foreign Appropriations Act and a violation of the Glenn Act, which says the United States will not give aid to any nation in possession of nuclear weapons technology that refuses to sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty and allow the IAEA inspections. Now, papers uncovered after the fall of the former government of South Africa confirm Israel tried to sell South Africa, and presumably other nations, clandestine nuclear weapons, the very activity the Non-Proliferation Treaty is supposed to prevent. Germany recently confirmed they have known for years that Israel arms their Dolphin-class submarines, which are paid for by the German taxpayers, with nuclear-tipped cruise missiles. But the corporate media wants to tell you that Iran, a nation that has not invaded another country in a war of aggression in over 200 years, a nation that has signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty, a nation that does allow IAEA inspections, which have never found any evidence of a weapons program, a nation that has only enriched uranium to 20% for medical applications, and nuclear weapons require 95% or higher, a nation that has not built or tested a nuclear warhead reentry vehicle, a nation that has not carried out any underground nuclear bomb tests, a nation that does not have a long-range rocket capable of carrying nuclear weapons. They're supposed to be the danger to world peace, justifying invasion and conquest. These people in the corporate media, are they on drugs? It's a rhetorical question. I used to work at ABC and NBC and CBS, and yes, they do drugs when they don't think anybody's looking. The propagandists have been screaming that Iran was on the verge of a nuclear weapon for 33 years now. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Fool me 33 years worth? They got to think we're on drugs to buy this. The real goal, from the United States money junkie point of view, is to conquer Iran so that its oil is available to sale for the rest of the world only for the U.S. dollar, to maintain that demand, that international demand for U.S. dollars, to prop up its value. Because absent shackling the world's resource-rich areas to the dollar's got nothing else to support it. We've lost most of our manufacturing. We don't make products anybody wants to buy. We were talking the other day, even our military hardware that used to be considered the best in the world, it's all high-priced junk. Nobody wants to buy our GMO crops and our GMO seeds. There's no goal to back up the U.S. dollar. And the Treasury Department has issued so many Treasury bonds to support quantitative easing, and now Bernanke's saying they don't even know how much that's cost. There aren't enough living Americans, even with all the instantly created immigrants they're talking about allowing to become citizens. There aren't enough Americans to make good on all those Treasury bonds. There's a Treasury bond bubble. And Obama is out there talking up Israel's right to attack Iran. No nation has a right to carry out an unprovoked attack on another nation. It's all lies, all deception, all fraud. Truth is the first casualty of war. Obama is over there promising that Israel can expect extended military funding. At a time when they're closing 50 schools in Chicago, Obama is saying they're going to take more of your tax dollars and give it to Israel to buy weapons or build weapons like Iron Dome, which, as it turns out, is only about 5 to 10% effective. It's just insane. And all of this money that Obama is sending there is a criminal offense under United States law. Under that Symington Amendment, under the Glenn Act. Now, both of those acts do have a provision that the president can hand out exemptions. But the instant the president signs an exemption for Israel, it is a confession to the American people that the U.S. federal government has known all along Israel has nuclear weapons and lied to you to go on selling this idea of a helpless Israel that needs our weapons and our money and our help because they're such victims and they're surrounded by evil enemies. And the reality is, Israel is the world's sixth most powerful nuclear-armed state, and the U.S. government knows it. So they're putting pedal to the metal. They're putting the hammer down on trying to get this war really going. Technically, it's already a world war. The United States has invaded over 10 countries on 2 continents under U.S. military doctrine. It's already a world war. They're just trying to find that big bang where everybody will wake up and say, oh, yes, it's a world war. We must sacrifice more so the money junkies can have it and the war machine can have it. And we're willing to be driven down to abject poverty because victory must come to us. And it won't. It won't. The United States is going to lose this world war. And the bankers don't care. They don't care. Bankers love war. They don't care which side wins and loses because both sides go into debt. And that's what it's really all about. The essence of the banking industry is keeping us all, whether we're individuals or nations, permanently enslaved to debt. And as Europe edges closer to collapse, you can just see on the corporate media, war, we got to have war now. They're in a race to start this World War III, get it really going before the economy falls apart. Because if the economy falls apart before the war is really going, we, the people of planet Earth, are going to point the fingers of blame where it goes. The private central banks and the government that let them do it. They want the war to really get going so they can say, oh, times are hard, yes, but it's not our fault. There's nothing wrong with private central banking. The government really did its best job. It's the war. We must go fight the war. That's what it is. They want a war and 1 billion people dead so they can duck the responsibility for what they've done to this nation and the world. Now, newly appointed Defense Minister Moshe Yaalon over in Israel is speaking with U.S. Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel, and Hagel is going to go visit Israel next month. Gee, I wonder what they're going to talk about. The money junkies want the wars, and the governments that are enslaved to the money junkies are going to say, yeah, okay, it's not my kids. Nobody I know is going to be out there being shot at. They're all in government jobs or rear echelon areas. We're not going to risk our own kids. It's other people's kids. I don't care if other people's kids are dying. I'm getting rich. Over at Russia Today, they're reporting that a United States plan for pinpoint strikes in Iran is all ready to go. Meaning the nuclear facilities, the power station, the medical isotope facility, the fuel rod processing plants, all of that. We know, of course, that the instant the United States and Israel go into Iran, they're going to be targeting every Iranian military installation. I am sure that by now, Iran has embarked on a program to disperse their military assets as uniformly over the country as they can. They're not going to make the mistake that was made here in Pearl Harbor, where they put all the airplanes in a nice little tight cluster in the middle of Ford Island, where the Japanese could blow up 10 planes with one bomb. Meanwhile, over in Israel, we're seeing the abuse against the Palestinians cranking up. Apparently, ahead of Obama's visit, the occupation forces have started arresting crowds of Palestinian children, some as young as 8 years old, because they represent a threat to the president. Israel has now ordered the removal of solar cells powering homes in a Palestinian community east of Yatta. Now, these solar cells were not paid for by Israel. They weren't even paid for by the Palestinians. These were donated by Europeans to get electricity into parts of Palestine where Israel will not allow power lines to be run. And now Israel is ordering that these solar panels be taken down. Because we all know terrorists use clean energy. Now, yesterday when we were talking about how the president's armored limousine had a strange breakdown, and by the way, apparently it is a diesel-powered vehicle, and somebody put gasoline in the tank. And it doesn't really matter which way it is, gas into diesel into gas. It was taken down. And I worried that Israel might stage some kind of an incident to scare Obama into obedience. And sure enough, rockets were fired into southern Israel from Gaza. And Israel saying, see, the Gazans are trying to kill the president, blah, 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 blah. Now, anybody who thinks the Palestinians are stupid enough to launch rockets into Israel while Obama is there, I have some of Saddam Hussein's nuclear weapons to sell you. Palestine needs the political support of the American people, something they'll lose shooting rockets at the president. Even if you don't like the president, it's a political slap in the face. And shooting rockets in the general direction of the president is not going to improve his view of Palestine. But again, he still went up there in Israel and said the Palestinians deserve a state. So this rocket attack from Gaza is a classic Israeli false flag, like the Lavon affair and like Israel's attack on the U.S. Liberty, both of which were blamed on Egypt until the truth came out. False flag attacks by Israel are like your old wrench in your toolbox. It's so worn out, it's lost its grip, and they don't realize they need a new wrench. And so that's fallen pretty much flat on its face here. All right, we're coming up on the end of the segment, and we're going to take a break for some commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. A couple of interesting stories coming in from the Trenches World Report, where apparently, unless the government of Cyprus agrees to loot the accounts of the Cyprus people, the European Central Bank will withdraw their emergency liquidity assistance on Monday, which will immediately collapse the two largest Cyprus banks and trigger the financial crash on Cyprus, which will trigger those derivatives sold by Wall Street, which will trigger blah, 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 blah. The concern from this article, of course, is that individuals, companies, and governments around the Mediterranean who have money in the Cyprus banks will never get it back out. Another story that's coming in from the Trenches World Report. Now, this is just anecdotal, but supposedly there is word that starting 60 days from today, American banks will require you to fill out a form to withdraw significant amounts of money. I don't know what the cutoff is going to be, but you're going to have to fill out this form explaining why you need your money back. This is not the banks. This is being mandated from the Federal Reserve, apparently, according to, and again, it's not confirmed, but we're starting to see this idea where if you have, let's say hypothetically, $5,000 in your savings account and you go in to take $4,000 of it out, you will have to fill out a form explaining why you need the money. And if you don't have a good explanation, they will simply say, we're sorry, this is above the limit that has now been mandated by the money junkies powers that be. Now, getting back to the situation in Israel, along with this rocket attack from Gaza into southern Israel, and like all of these staged phony rocket attacks, the rockets hit empty ground. Nobody was hurt, nobody was killed, no buildings were damaged. It just blew a hole in the desert. So now we have this story here, and this is coming out of Dayton, Ohio Daily News. Police and FBI investigate incidents at the Oakwood Jewish family home. Swastikas were painted in red on this home. Nothing was reported as stolen. Now, go out there. This is your homework for tonight, and there will be a pop quiz in class tomorrow. Web search hate crime hoax. And you will see that faking hate crimes is a favorite tool of those seeking political attention to push an agenda. Like that professor at the Claremont Colleges who wrote anti-Semitic graffiti on her own car, or more recently, a Jewish student who was caught on security cameras writing hate messages on her own dorm room. The usual agenda from these hoaxes is to build sympathy for the permanent victim class, and ultimately Israel, which is seeking political cover for its ongoing land theft from the Palestinians and attempts to crank up wars for Americans to die in Syria, Iran, who the heck knows where next. In the cases where the perpetrators of these hate crimes... Okay, got to take a break for station identification. More about hate crime hoaxes and political gamesmanship after we come back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're talking about phony hate crimes. And there's a long history of them. And you need to do a web search, hate crime hoax. Now, again, this rocket attack from Gaza into South Israel that hit absolutely nothing, and I just got an email from somebody saying it always amazes me how these rockets fall exactly when it will do the Palestinians the least good. It's a false flag. It's all illusion. It's stage magic to get you to believe something that doesn't really exist. Al-Qaeda, Saddam's nuclear weapons, and so forth. So over in Ohio, there's been another one of these hate crimes, and the corporate media is saying, oh, those poor Jewish people, they're always so targeted by every... And, of course, swastikas are painted on the house. Paint comes off very easily. And you know something? Who cares about the swastika anymore? The only reason it's being kept alive is Israel waving it around and Hollywood waving it around. Whatever it is that actually happened in Germany in the 1940s happened before we were all even alive. It's not part of current events. And as I've said before, all these people running around claiming to be modern Nazis, they're actors, they're fakes. How do we know? Simple. When you're a kid and you play cops and robbers or cowboys and Indians, you don't want to be the robbers. You don't want to be the Indians because they lose. The big kids will be the cowboys and the cops, and they'll make the little kids play the Indians and the robbers. Nobody wants to play the loser. And for those of you who may not have studied history too closely, the Nazis lost. They have been vilified as the ultimate evil on planet Earth. Nobody wants to be them. And again, when they have actually caught the perpetrators of these hate crime hoaxes, or the hate crimes as a whole, more than 9 out of 10 of them turn out to be fake, including the sprayers of the swastikas. I remember one time when they were showing a photo of swastikas sprayed on whatever, and it was drawn backwards. Like somebody who was really into the swastika would make a mistake like that. You have been brainwashed to always look at the swastika as this sign of evil, so that the hoaxers and the propagandists can wave it at you and say, see, ooh, bad Nazis, give us money, give us weapons, give us protection, don't ask any questions, we have swastikas. Now, given that when they catch the perpetrators of these hate crimes, and 9 out of 10 turn out to be fakes. We may logically conclude that in all of those hate crimes where the perpetrators are not captured, 9 out of 10 of them are also fake. Don't take my word for it. Go out there and web search hate crime hoax. You will find a lot of information. This goes on a lot. Corporate media, rarely. They will sometimes, but rarely, generally, they don't report it when it turns out to be a hoax. Or it's buried on the back page, underneath the obituaries. Now, we're seeing this very interesting piece of propaganda coming out of Activist Post, and I think it was posted there primarily to call attention to the fact that it is propaganda. Syria teeters on Obama's red line. Now, as you're probably already aware, earlier this week there was a chemical weapon attack inside Syria, and the Syrian government said it was the hired mercenaries, and the hired mercenaries said, who, us? We wouldn't do anything like that. Even though it's been documented, they have chemical weapons and have been training to use them. And the U.S. government immediately said, we reject the claim our hired mercenaries had anything to do with it. It must be Syria. They're on the red line. We're ready to attack. Well, details of the chemical attack have come out. 16 government soldiers, Syrian government soldiers, were killed in this chemical attack. No hired mercenaries were found among the bodies, and the rest were civilians, women and children. Does that sound like the government of Syria is attacking their own troops' positions with chemical weapons? I don't think so. We'll be right back. And aloha, welcome back to the show. Now, earlier in the program, we were talking about rumors coming out of Popular Bank of Cyprus that they had only hours of liquidity left. Now we're getting something that seems a little more serious confirmation here. The Bank of Cyprus, which is Cyprus's largest bank, is apparently pleading and begging with the Cyprus government to move forward with this plan to loot depositors' accounts to save the banks, and is describing itself as the Cyprus economy is on the brink, in a fragile state. So they're out there screaming, please, please, give us the 11th marble. We know it's out there. Well, we don't really know it, but we believe, we believe, we believe. Now, common sense has to kick in here, because let us, as a thought experiment, postulate that the government of Cyprus goes ahead with this plan, and they start grabbing money from the depositors' accounts to prop up the banks a little bit longer. Do you think it is a one-time move? Of course not. Because the underlying processes that have plunged Europe and the United States and every nation with a private central bank into this despair of debt have not changed. The machinery that brought us to this brink is still operating. In fact, they've just put a turbocharger on the engine. This will not solve Cyprus's problem. It won't solve Europe's problem. It's just another kick the can down the road act of desperation by a global banking cartel that will not admit to itself that the system they have sworn undying fealty to, because it's making them rich, has a fatal design flaw. Just like the fatal design flaw that brought down the Tacoma Narrows Bridge, that doomed Challenger. It's bad engineering. And the people who set up these private central banks don't care, because they know there's no afterlife they have to worry about. They're not worried about whether they're going to go to heaven and have a harp, or the other place and get into some really good poker games with their fellows. They just want their goodies now. And they'll go to their graves happy after a lifetime of luxury and privilege and wealth that they did not actually earn. And they'll figure, when it all falls apart, it's after I'm gone. I don't have to live with that. It's somebody else's problem. More of that Adam Smith mentality. Going to grab some phone calls. Keith in Montana. Aloha, Keith. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, good morning there, Mike. Hey, I just had three quick things. One was on that story you just posted here on Wrangell. We're talking about millions of kids being shot by assault weapons, and I thought, is this the same Wrangell that's pushing for the draft that would put millions of kids in front of other assault rifles?
Yeah, it is. Funny how that works out, you know. We don't want children killed in our country. We need to send them to other countries to be blown to bits.
Yeah, the other one was in there's a report out from Australia there, from that prime minister there, where they did this massive thing about Palestine, and they only visited areas that were in the occupied territories, which favored Israel.
Of course.
And as this guy was giving this report, boy, he was being booed and everything like that about what the conditions are like for the Palestinians, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other story I had was, I see the U.S. is pushing for this war crimes in Sri Lanka. And it's funny that comes right as it's announced that Iran is docking its navy there, you know.
Yeah, funny how that works out. You know, again, you know, the reality is, looking at the geopolitical situation, where Russia's influence is growing, China's influence is growing, and the U.S. is mired in all of these unwinnable wars, it is clear we are already losing this thing. I'm not going to say we. I'm not going to say we. There's no we about this. This is the money junkies in the government, and they're losing it, and they're destroying the world around them, including this country.
It does seem like they're pushing for a world war.
They are, as hard as they can, and we've got to be on the lookout for a new false flag attack. Blow up a city in the United States with a nuclear weapon smuggled in from Israel, and blame it on Iran. They're that desperate to do it.
Oh, speaking of that, Mike, you mentioned yesterday about that sinkhole down there in Louisiana.
Yes.
There's those other wells around there that's the strategic oil supply, which is in all those salt domes. Plus, there's 1.2 or 1.5 million barrels of raw gas, whatever, I forget.
Natural gas.
Yeah, that you can imagine if that there was touched off. I think they estimated it'd be 100 times larger than when one of the blasts of Hiroshima would be if that was to go off.
Yeah, it's a very dangerous situation. It's geologically unstable. They have all these flammable compounds and, in some cases, nuclear waste buried down there. The fossil record here on Earth has documented prehistoric incidences of massive methane blowouts, naturally occurring in those cases, that literally kill all the life for 1,000 miles around. And we're looking at that potential there in Louisiana, and I don't understand why they didn't immediately start a national program of pumping that stuff out and taking it someplace else. They're treating the sinkhole the way they treated the Gulf oil disaster. Well, let's just wait and see if it heals itself. Or Fukushima, same thing.
Yeah, I was going to comment on that real quick there. When that blowout first happened on the BP thing, I sent a letter to the USGS about that. You have to imagine that they admitted that the well casing was cracked, and we've all seen shows of submarines where they got like a pinhole, and it's like a high-pressure stream being shot into the sub, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I put this hypothesis to the USGS that if that well started at 5,000 feet below sea level and went down another additional 18,000, and they admitted they drilled into the side of the salt dome there, you would think that the erosion would continue there. And they did that for, 10 months of that leaking or something like that. And now we find out that all those salt domes are eroding there in Louisiana from underneath, not from above, but from underneath.
Yes.
And so I assume that this seawater has been dissolving this salt clear up underneath the Louisiana coast there.
Well, again, it was very poor foresight to use these geologically unstable structures as natural storage facilities for anything that was potentially a dangerous chemical, whether it's flammable or radioactive. And again, it's just, let's come up with a way to exploit this financially now, and if it falls apart, we'll let other people worry about it. The problem when you're dealing with oil wells, especially the ones that are going very, very deep underground, as long as there is oil or water in that pipe, the weight of the column of that oil or water counters the pressure from deep down in the earth. What happens with a blowout is when you think you're pumping oil and all of a sudden there is a large bubble of methane gas in the pipe. It weighs a lot less. And so the pressure from deep underneath starts accelerating the flow in that pipe. And it can get up to amazing speeds, and when the methane runs out and you have that oil coming up at a very high rate of speed, it can break that equipment at the top of the wellhead. That's what a blowout is. And that's why there are supposed to be blowout preventers, and the best of all are called the acoustic blowout preventers, which electronically listen to that pipe, and when they hear methane coming up, they shut off immediately, so that column of oil can't build up a huge momentum and become destructive. But in the United States of America, acoustic blowout preventers are not mandated as they are in other oil-producing portions of the world, because those acoustic blowout preventers cost about $500,000 each, and when you multiply that by all the oil wells in the Gulf of Mexico, that's billions and billions of dollars that could otherwise go to executive bonuses and keeping the stockholders happy. And as it turns out, the Deepwater Horizon had a manual blowout preventer, which is mandated, but it was 4 years overdue for its mandated regular preventative maintenance, and that's why it just didn't work in time to stop the blowout from happening. And we've got more of that down there.
Yeah. Well, that thing, I forget what movie it was I saw, but that Marianas Trench there they have, I think it's off Japan there.
Yeah.
And they were talking about the immense pressure that's down there at 4, 5, 6 miles deep like that. So you can imagine when you drill into the crust of the earth like that, and this water making its way from 4 miles below the surface like that, find its way, then all those wells all through Texas and everything, they inject brine and salt water into those because oil and water doesn't mix, and the oil comes to the top, and then that's how they recover their oil. But I think
but again, the hydrodynamics of the situation is as long as you have that column of oil and water in the pipe, its weight will counter the pressure, and the oil and water arrives at the top of the well with a little bit of pressure, or if it doesn't, it requires a pump. As oil wells get depleted, you have to go from simply letting the oil flow out to actually having one of those back-and-forth rocking pumps on it. The danger is if that pipe going down 1.5 miles gets filled with a single giant bubble of methane, then you've got a runaway situation that can literally blow the top off the well structure.
Right. All right, well, that's it, Mike. Have a good day. Aloha, and we'll talk to you later, okay?
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to go to Lisa in Texas. We may have to take you through the next commercial break. What's on your mind?
Hi, really quickly regarding the rockets. In Gaza, I was reading a really good article by Roy Taub, who, was an Israeli and in the IDF, and he just wrote an article about this, that something important that has gone on is that apparently President Obama made a speech while he was in Palestine saying that, that Palestine deserved its own state. And shortly thereafter, the rockets flew. And, he thinks that he sees it as a veiled message to the administration. Don't mess with this. They don't even want to one thing.
Yeah, I was unaware of the time ordering about that, but yeah, that makes it obvious it's Israel doing this. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back.
Thanks a lot.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. 800-313-9443. There is now a live stream on the front of whatreallyhappened.com showing the riots going on in Cyprus. The Cyprus government has now decided they're going to start throwing state assets into this bailout deal. In other words, they, like the EPA in this country, are going to start taking the property of the people and give it to the money junkies in exchange for more of this ink and paper stuff that everybody is taught to believe they cannot live their lives without. So it's getting very desperate over there. And it's all based on belief. There's no science of banking. It's a belief. It's a religion. It's an arbitrary set of rules and beliefs that benefit the clergy, in this case the money junkies, who are addicted to your money, just like churches. Arbitrary set of rules that benefit the priesthood, who are really there for your small children. Last night I watched that HBO special on Mea Maxima Culpa again, and it's just, if you haven't seen it, you got to hunt that down. I think it's still on HBO on demand. Now, getting back to the situation in Syria, trying to crank up that war, trying to get a world war going so that we'll forget how the private central bankers impoverished us and how the governments sold out to them, like the government of Cyprus is getting ready to do. Because remember, the government doesn't own everything. The government owns its own buildings, and it owns its military bases. But the public land, the public assets of the nation belong to the people. That's the principle we run this nation on. The government doesn't have a right to take taxpayer-funded assets and sell them off. They've been doing it. You pay taxes to build a highway. The government turns around and sells that highway to a private corporation who then charges you a toll to use the road that you built. So, anyway, Representative Mike Rogers is out there screaming, "It's time to act in Syria." He's out there in high dudgeon. This is the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. And he's out there basically with the Kool-Aid that the Syrian government launched a chemical weapons attack on their own troops. He's not going to talk about that. He's basically saying that a failure to invade Syria is a stain on our national character. Well, Mr. Rogers, it's not a beautiful day in the neighborhood. Our national character is already stained by the U.S. government's constant groveling before Israel and Wall Street. Our national character is already stained by Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo and the other torture centers being operated by the U.S. government around the world. Our national character is already stained by the invasions of oil-rich nations under the claim we're defeating nuclear weapons or bringing them democracy or correcting their hatred of our freedoms. But in reality, to force them to sell their oil only for dollars, to prop up the petrodollar. Our national character is already stained by massive vote fraud and party leaderships openly disdainful of the wishes of the party rank and file, as we saw at both conventions last year. Our national character is already stained by a Congress bought and paid for by AIPAC, yourself included. However, Mr. Rogers, if you truly feel the time has come to act in Syria, here's your parachute, here's your rifle. Watch your head climbing into that transport plane, and we'll call Assad and tell him you are on your way to kick his butt all by yourself. But after that whopper you told us about Saddam's nuclear weapons, and the whoppers you're still trying to tell about Iran's nuclear weapons, you will forgive the American people if we sit this one out and keep our children safe at home. Because the biggest stain on our national character is a leadership lusting for wars only so long as they themselves do not have to fight in them. Paul Bremer is out there responding to final, 10 years after the fact, confirmation by the corporate media that, yeah, they lied about Saddam's weapons of mass destruction to start the war in Iraq. And Paul Bremer's trying to explain it away, saying, yeah, even though we made major mistakes here, I still think the Iraqis are far better off. Well, you just go out there and you start web searching photos of Iraq before the U.S. conquest and Iraq as it is today. No, the Iraqis are not better off. Their lives have been destroyed. They will be decades getting back to the lives they had. U.S. intervention to get those weapons of mass destruction to punish Saddam for 9/11, and because Saddam was trading wet, sloppy kisses with Al-Qaeda, none of which turned out to be true. The United States government invaded Iraq for one reason only. Iraq was selling their oil for the euro. Horror of horrors, we cannot have that. So we're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with phone calls after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to grab a couple of phone calls here. Frank in New York. Aloha, Frank. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike? I'm sorry to change the subject a little bit, but I was just curious what your reaction would be to this new thing they pushed through here in New York for the gun grab. The state's going to provide a $500 reward through tax dollars to individuals who turn in their neighbors for illegally possessing firearms that are now deemed illegal due to the SAFE Act. Just wanted your reaction to that.
Well, my reaction is very, very simple. They got 50,000 homeless people on the streets of New York City who are going hungry, and the government wants to spend tax dollars to find people who've got a magazine that holds a few too many bullets. You want to talk about a government that is completely out of touch with the needs of its own population? That's my feedback on that.
Yeah, I had about the same feeling myself, but I didn't know if you even heard about that yet.
Well, yeah, I did in fact hear about that, and that was my first reaction. We're seeing the U.S. government usurping our money, and that's the correct word for it. We, the American people, agree to pay taxes for good roads, good schools, good hospitals, good infrastructure so we can carry on our commerce with a minimum of interference. And the government takes our taxes and they're not spending it on roads. They're closing schools. And they're not taking care of our people who have been harmed by this financial disaster. They're giving the money to Israel. They're giving the money to Wall Street. That's usurpation. And it's mentioned in the Declaration of Independence because the British government was doing the same thing, taxing the American colonists and not spending the money on the colonies, but spending it on wars with France. And, of course, nice, fancier palaces for the ruling classes in Great Britain. That's usurpation. When those who are given authority over the assets use those assets for a purpose other than that desired by the owners. Remember, we the people, we own this country. It is ours. The government is not granted ownership over this nation, nor the rights appertaining to ownership. They are hired as caretakers of our national sovereignty to do for the community what the community needs and cannot do on an individual basis. The U.S. government is like the janitor for the nation. We trust them with the keys to take care of this nation. And they're not doing that. And that's why it was in the Declaration of Independence, when a long train of abuses and usurpations.
Thank you, Mike.
Okay, you got that? All right.
Yeah, ma'am. Thank you.
All right, going to switch over to Kyle in Pennsylvania. Aloha, Kyle. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I was going to talk about Cyprus real quick, but I wanted to double back and speak to Brennan admitting once and for all that, Iraq never had any weapons of mass destruction. And what upsets me most about the story is not that these people lied and killed and took American lives for money.
Well, that's enough to tick me off.
Well, it pisses me off that nobody cares. That husbands, wives, brothers and sisters are all now dead so that the rich can get richer. And there's not people beating down doors. George Bush, Dick Cheney, Condoleezza Rice, Colin Powell, these people are all still free. I mean, you talk about torches and pitchforks. That is something that is worthy of that. And if the government won't follow up, and if the people who are supposed to put these people in jail over crimes like this won't do it, it is in my belief that the citizens must take it in their own hands and say, no, you need to be brought before a trial and you need to be, face punishment because you basically facilitated murder of Americans.
Well, I agree with you. A couple of small technical problems with that. Certainly in the case of George W. Bush, he still has Secret Service protection. And those guys have all the guns that we're being told are bad to own, plus which I don't personally have his mailing address. I didn't know where to send the Christmas card this last year. But I think, again, stay patient. The system is falling apart on its own. And after it's all crashing down, and we form a new government in this nation, at that point I would say one of the first orders of business we have to look at is a war crimes tribunal.
Well, and that's the thing. After 10 years of continuous war that we never should have been in, there are not many people in this country who don't know someone or who haven't personally been touched by this war, losing a family member or losing a friend. And that's where I say the rage and the anger toward these people and the way that they conducted themselves. I don't understand how it's still contained. If it was 50 years ago, 70 years ago, it would be a completely different story. And that's what I find to be the most disheartening.
Well, this is where that whole divide and conquer thing comes in, because yes, the American people are furious. The government will use trickery to turn our anger against each other. That's why they're always fanning up, gays versus straights, and men versus women, and young versus old, and black versus white, and peach versus taupe, and mauve versus lavender. They're always trying to find a division. They know we're angry. They're trying to decide for us where that anger is going to go, against ourselves or against the designated enemy. And
no matter what, and I personally believe that no matter where you fall on any of those subjects, abortion, gay marriage, any of those things, you still know right from wrong. And you still know that when they lied and they killed not only innocent Americans but innocent Iraqis, that they need to answer for their crime. There is no, I mean, I
agree. I absolutely agree.
I don't see anybody who can argue that fact.
No, I agree with you. I absolutely agree with you. There's another aspect of human nature, and that is that still within the United States of America, Americans that still have something left to lose, something that the IRS can take away from them, something that the banks can take away from them, okay, are not, they're angry, but they're going to conceal it. You know, it's this idea of, trickle-down theory of anger and rage. The CEO screams at his division manager. The division manager's not going to scream back at the CEO, so the division manager turns around and screams at the department manager. The department manager isn't going to scream back at the division manager. Department manager turn around and scream at one of the employees. The employee isn't going to scream back at his manager. He's going to go home and scream at his wife. And the wife will turn around and scream at the children, and the children will turn around and kick the dog. That's kind of how human nature operates. But when you reach the point where you have taken so much away from the people and they don't have anything left to lose by getting angry at those who have taken away their lives, that's when things start to explode. That's what's happening in Cyprus. That's what happened in Greece, what happened in Egypt, what happened in all of these places. We've been pushed to the breaking point.
Which brings me to Cyprus, the reason why I called. And everybody needs to be prepared that if this situation goes the wrong way, and there starts to be a severe bank run collapse, if this situation goes upside down, the whole European Union could come down in a matter of weeks, days.
Agreed.
So I mean, this whole Cyprus thing really is. I don't typically get too worked up or too worried, but like I said, if this thing goes the wrong way, a month from now, it could be a totally different world.
Well, when it happens, it'll happen very fast, like the way it did in the former Soviet Union. The problem with Cyprus is that, as I was mentioning during hour number one, there is no way for it to go right. Because there's only one of two possible outcomes. Either the people of Cyprus will block this looting of their savings account politically, and the Cyprus banks will crash, or they'll go ahead with this looting of the population, and the population will riot and run on the bank, and the bank will crash anyway. And it's going to go bad no matter what happens. We're irrevocable.
I think people have. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think people have a idea that that's there, and that's not the story here. And Cyprus, one of these countries, Italy, Spain, Cyprus, Portugal, Ireland, one of these countries has to be the first domino. And once that first domino falls, it is a very, very quick transition till it gets to your front door. So,
well, absolutely. I mean, there's a direct line from Cyprus to Wall Street through those credit default swaps, and now we've got Bernanke actually saying, yes, if the contagion from Europe spreads to the U.S., they're going to consider looting bank accounts here in the United States. They're already talking about it, and because of those derivatives, there is no way to prevent the contagion in Europe from hitting Wall Street. And Wall Street, as always, will turn around and solve their problems by going to the U.S. government and say, give us more of the people's money.
And the fact that our entire economy is based on confidence, that's all it's based on. It's an illusion. It's based on confidence.
It's a confidence game.
When Bernanke's out there saying things like that, that's diluting confidence. That is diminishing our economy. And it's, like I said, it's a quick slide from there to here to desolation.
When it happens, it's going to happen with blinding speed. There's absolutely no question. What every state government should be planning right now, this second, is to prepare to issue their own state-backed currency, value-based, spend it into circulation, let it power commerce, tax it back at the same amount without accruing interest to a private central banker. Arizona is apparently again considering silver and gold as legal tender. Every state in the United States needs to be making these plans right now. Because following the big crash internationally, those bankers are going to be back saying, we'll issue banknotes at interest and get your economy going again, and these politicians will walk us back into the same trap we just got out of. And so everybody listening to this show, you should be calling your state government and say, now's the time to be getting that lifeboat ready because the Eurotanic has hit that iceberg, and it's heading down, and there is no stopping it, and it will come here.
On the toes and just be aware that tonight when you go to sleep or tomorrow night when you go to sleep, the morning you wake up, it could be a completely different ballgame.
Oh, who can sleep these days? Oh, my goodness. Yes.
All right, Mike. I'll talk to you, buddy.
All right. Thanks an awful lot there. Now, getting back to this strident call for war, 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 and they don't even care where. Have you noticed how hard they're trying to start more wars all over the globe? Over there in Korea. Now, remember, earlier this week, the United States started drilling with B-52 bombers that are nuclear capable to practice missions to do nuclear strikes into North Korea. North Korea, of course, is now responding to bomb the U.S. bases in Japan and Guam in retaliation. And the media is trying to say, oh, bad North Korea, how can they do that? The provocation came from the United States. Sanctions, military drills off their borders, all of these things calculated to escalate the situation. Roosevelt did the same thing to get us into World War II, that 8-step plan that Office of Naval Intelligence Lieutenant Arthur H. McCollum came up with to goad the Japanese into the attack Roosevelt needed. Included, sail your ships off their coast. That is a political insult they cannot accept. And that's what the U.S. has been doing over there off the shores of North Korea with this Japanese-American drill practicing to invade North Korea. Of course it's intended to get the North Koreans angry. And now they're drilling with B-52s that carry nuclear bombs. We're going to go in, we're going to nuke North Korea. Do you expect North Korea to sit there and say, okay? Of course they're going to threaten back. That's what the U.S. wanted. It's an engineered response. Meanwhile, apparently Japan and the United States are putting together a plan to defend these disputed islands in the East China Sea against China. And remember, the goal of war with China is not these islands. It is to politically and economically isolate China from the rest of the Western world so that China's gold-backed yuan is no longer considered as a replacement of the dollar. They're going to set the surface of planet Earth on fire to protect this piece of ink and paper called the Federal Reserve Note. That is how insane this situation is right now. Alrighty, got a caller on the line, Chuck in Texas. Aloha, Chuck. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Hey, I've got a question for you. I read that Arizona bill, and it's only, there's just one page, and it's just amendments. I couldn't find the whole bill anywhere that it was amending. Here's my question. It said coins minted by the United States government. Okay, how would they value those coins? I'm not going to turn in my junk silver or a $20 gold piece at $20. I was trying to figure out, just because it's minted, it qualifies it as minted by the United States government. Okay, so that it just feels like a trap to me.
No, I think what Arizona is trying to do is avoid the problems that the Liberty Dollar had. But certainly in the event, what am I saying? In the event, I'm still an optimist. When the Federal Reserve implodes, the private central bank implodes, and the U.S. government collapses, it's going to take the Arizona legislature 5 minutes to remove that provision and say, we're going to now mint our own coins. Remember, the Liberty Dollar was out there putting out these melt value dollars. They had a face value on them that was a little bit out of there. And when they started putting Ron Paul's face on the coins, that's when President Bush got all upset at them. How dare you put his face on your coins and not me? So the Secret Service went in and shut down the Liberty Dollar on the claim that by using the word dollar, it was now a counterfeit currency. And of course, that's a ridiculous argument because other countries use the phrase dollar, like Zimbabwe. It is not the copyrighted trademark property of the Federal Reserve. It was just, Bush's ego getting the best of him. So Arizona is saying coins minted by the U.S. government so that they can pretend to be in compliance with the U.S. legal tender laws. As far as your junk silver is concerned, those are going to be great for barter items. I wouldn't trade them in on any of their coins. Just hang on to them and keep them for the melt value because they will be as trustworthy because they are, in fact, known to contain a fixed amount of silver, and they're going to be good for trade and barter. How much they're actually worth is going to be up to you know, the people who are wheeling and dealing to get those coins and use them as a medium of exchange. But ultimately, any universally recognized item of value makes a medium of exchange. When the Federal Reserve goes away, it's not going to shut down the American economy. It'll free it to use other options. And that will be a good thing. It'll be rough for a couple of months. I'm not denying that. But we'll bounce back like the Russian republics did. We just have to remember, no private central bank, kick out the money junkies, and life will be good. Okay?
Thanks.
All right, you got it. We're coming up here on another commercial break here, and we got a lot more stuff to talk about. The phone lines are still open. 800-313-9443. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I'm looking at CNN, and they're talking about mental illness in the National Basketball Association. Boy, talk about fluff and tabloid, and I'm not a big fan of basketball. I used to go to the Lakers games with my first wife, Broadzilla, and even then I didn't get excited about it. And even if the NBA is filled with mentally defective people, doesn't it impact us? Doesn't affect the lives of ordinary Americans. They're not in charge of our money. They're not in charge of our war machine. So what if they're a little bit wacko? Let them have fun, as long as they're happy. But it's not news. When you're watching that box with wires and a light telling you these things about Twitter's 7th birthday and Beyonce and the trial of Michael Jackson's doctor and the rest of that stuff, you need a very simple filter. Does it affect your life directly? And if it doesn't, it's not news. It's fluff, maybe advertising. It's certainly distraction. There is virtually no mention, just the briefest of acknowledgement in the American corporate media, certainly the TV news, that there's anything worth concern over in Cyprus. But they go on for 10, 15, 20 minutes at a pop about Obama promising everlasting support and your money and your children's lives for almighty Israel. Now, down in South America, as you're probably aware, Venezuela is coming up on new elections next month to replace Hugo Chavez. And already the Venezuelan government has been screaming that the United States is clearly inside Venezuela, trying to alter the outcome of the election. They outed a CIA plot to assassinate one of the candidates in order to try and provoke a popular uprising and a coup d'etat along the lines of the one the CIA tried and failed to do in Iran back in 2009. And so Venezuela has now cut off communications set up by a top U.S. diplomat in protest over U.S. interference in the country's internal affairs. And this underscores something I've been saying for many, many years, and we've even got it on one of the coffee cups you can buy from our website. The fastest way to stop terror is to stop screwing around with other people's countries. But of course, our government doesn't want to stop screwing around with other people's countries. They view it as part of their manifest destiny, their divine right, the projection of power and influence. And if several thousand Americans happen to get killed in a genuine terror attack, as distinct from all these staged phony terror attacks to demonize some as yet to be determined enemy, that's just the price of doing business. Lose 100 million lives in these wars to prop up the banks, just the cost of doing business. Your child crippled or killed over in Iraq or Afghanistan or soon to be Iran, just the cost of doing business. It's just good business. Don't take it personal. It's just business. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. This is our third hour. Dan the Man is now sitting in our control room, taking over from Manny. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. This gets to be a little depressing doing this job. It really does, because when I was a kid, which was admittedly half a century ago, I had an image of what America was supposed to be coming out of growing up in New England, being born in Boston, cradle of liberty, walking the Freedom Mile, and the high ideals that this nation was founded on. And over time coming to understand that what we have now is not what was intended by the Founding Fathers. And it's almost like the experience I went through when my mother was dying of cancer, and just watching her rot away from the radiation and the chemotherapy. And it's somebody that you love, and you know they're headed for a final doom that you can't stop or do anything about. And I'm feeling much the same way about our current situation. The best we can do is plan on life after federal government, life after Federal Reserve. It is a consummation devoutly to be wished. Looks like the stock market is going to end slightly down. Certainly nothing that you need to jump out of windows about. But it's got to be making investors nervous. It's got to be making the banks nervous. Because remember, when they started rigging the stock market, way back during the Clinton administration, these banks and investment houses started buying large blocks of stock to increase demand and drive the prices up. It's speculation. And Clinton encouraged it because they were using the stock market as a political banner. Everything's okay. Look at the Dow Industrials. It's in record territory until you adjust it for inflation. And now it's starting to stutter. People are openly talking about a stock bubble. And there is one. It's a huge one. Big one. Everything's bubbled up. I'm forever blowing bubbles. That's what the policy of the government seems to be, and certainly Wall Street. They love bubbles. They love volatility. If you go back and you read my article about the fatal flaws in the American financial system, part of the problem is because the money junkies can make more money with a volatile economy, they will consciously or even subconsciously arrange things to increase the chaos, because out of that chaos they can make a fast buck. Now, earlier we had that caller talking about how there is this program funded by the taxpayers offering a $500 reward for anybody who will call in and rat out their neighbors for having a magazine that's possibly holding a few too many bullets. This at a time when New York City has at least 50,000 homeless people who are not being cared for. And you know what this is? It's not just the gun ban, and it's not just the hideous misuse of public funds. It's another attempt to turn us against each other. So we're not talking with each other. We're not sharing our gunsmithing secrets with each other. It's just like the Nazis did when they were offering rewards to the very hungry and starving German people. We'll give you so many Reichsmarks if you'll rat out your neighbors. It was just a way of keeping the population isolated and separate from each other. That's just more of the same thing. We're looking at your emails, we're listening to your phone calls, we're looting your computers, we have cameras watching you all the time. It's a psychological operation to keep you from talking with your friends and neighbors, and it's a gigantic bluff. It really is. We've got to take a break for commercials. We've got a caller waiting on the line we'll get to as soon as we come back from these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. I mean, we're pretty much at the top of the hour, and CNN, while we were on the commercial break, CNN was running a story on how salt really does make food taste better. Like, we don't already know that? And they're just going on and on about there's a scientific basis. Who cares? What is this? Pushing for the salt companies? Or pushing back at salt-free diets and saying, oh, salt is good for you. Sea salt is good for you. It's the exact same salt you have in your bloodstream. In fact, one of the ways we know more or less how long ago our ancestors, evolutionary ancestors, crawled out of the ocean is by looking at the concentration of those salts in our blood versus what it is today in seawater. Because over time, seawater gets saltier and saltier and saltier, and our blood does not. But that's what your blood is. It's seawater. We took a part of that ocean with us when we evolved. Now, getting back to serious situation, we've got a caller on the line. Jerry in Chicago. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. I wanted to just ask you two quick questions. One, last night I was listening to the Hagman and Hagman report, and Doug Hagman mentioned that one of his banker buddies that thought he was nuts for the last 5 or 6 years called him up and said in 60 days they're going to be ordered to keep their banks open only a few days a week, maybe 2, maybe 3, and your maximum withdrawal cannot be more than $1,000, or else you got to fill out an application and get it okayed by bank management to take out more than $1,000 of your own money from your own account. You got to get it okayed from them. Have you heard anything about that?
Well, I heard the same report. I have not heard a confirmation. I'm going to ask some local people in the banking industry to see if I can find out. But again, with Bernanke actually out there saying that Cyprus-type haircuts are now under serious consideration here in the United States of America, we understand that the government will move to protect the banks ahead of the people. We just saw that in Cyprus. The banks are not your friend. They are not on your side. Your money is not safe there. Cyprus just proved it. And so, again, I don't have a confirmation of this particular situation, but you need to understand that banks already will limit your maximum withdrawal because their cash reserves on hand are very, very thin. They have enough cash on hand to deal with withdrawals that are going to come in that day. And if you come in and ask for a large chunk of your savings account, they will say you need to come back Thursday because we need to order the cash in. And so in various forms, these kinds of limits are already being introduced. And a really large cash withdrawal, and I don't know what the cutoff is, but a really large cash withdrawal will trigger a report to the federal government for anti-terrorism investigations. And so it really is very much a situation where, again, the best advice I can offer to everybody right now is only have as much in the bank as you need to meet your obligations, and you keep the rest under your own control. Keep it at home, put some of it into silver and gold, put a lot of it into ammunition. That's going to be a great barter item after the crash. If you can find any ammunition after this runaway buying by the Department of Homeland Security, who still will not tell Congress why they're buying all this hollow point man-killer ammunition, like we needed them to actually explain why they're buying it. It's obvious what's going on.
Yeah, you've been saying that for as long as I've been listening to you, and I started listening to you maybe around August or September.
No, it's been a while.
Hey, the other question I had, not to sound stupid or geographically idiotical, but where is Cyprus, basically?
Cyprus is in the Mediterranean, and if you just look on a map, you'll see it. It's a nice little island. It's over there in the eastern half. It's used to be under the domination of Greece. There's still a huge Greek community on Cyprus, and the rest are Turkish.
Oh, okay, great. I was going to guess Greek, but thanks for clearing that up, and you have a great day.
All right, thanks an awful lot. All righty, so let's see. Corporate media, it's all fluff. It's all tabloid. They don't want you to know just how bad things are in Europe right now. And you know why? Because when Cyprus collapses and they start thinking about taking your bank accounts here, they don't want you to have an advance warning. They don't want you to think about taking your wealth out of the control of the banks. They want it to be a complete surprise for the American people, the way it was for the people of Cyprus. By the time you know that's what they're doing, the electronic locks will already be in place. They're not thinking what's good for the American people. They're not even thinking what's good for the nation. It's the money junkies looking out for themselves. Now, there's an interesting story. This is coming out of ABC. Remember the Fort Hood mass shooting? And they found this major, Nidal Hassan, and they said, oh, he did it. He's an Islamic. He's a terrorist. He's a Muslim. And they locked him up. And basically, the judge is saying that he will not be allowed to plead guilty to premeditated murder because that would result in a death penalty, and the military rules say that you cannot plead guilty to a crime that carries a death sentence. So they're now saying that he should plead guilty to a lesser charge where there won't be a public trial. They're trying to keep a public trial from happening. The story I got from inside Fort Hood that led to these 13 soldiers being killed was a group of soldiers had just rotated home from Iraq, thinking they were about to be mustered out and go back to civilian life, and their officer said, under stop loss, you're being deployed back to the war zone. There was a mutiny, if you want to call it that, and a firefight, and 13 people were killed, but they didn't want to admit to the public that the rank-and-file military were starting to shoot at officers, just like they didn't admit on all the fragging that was going on in Vietnam. And so they found a convenient Muslim. We're going to blame him, and that will be the end of the story. Going back to the phones here, Nick in Canada. Aloha, Nick. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, aloha, Mike. How's it going?
Going fine.
Good, good. Do you mind if I just give a brief intro, because I know you've got lots to cover?
Yep.
Okay, first off, I was born and raised in Northern Ireland during the height of the conflict.
Yes.
So serious civil unrest was day-to-day life, right? However, before I moved to Canada, I held a government job where I would see the First and Deputy First Minister on a daily basis. I was involved with the Central Emergency Planning Office on July 7th. I've even been to the secret nuclear bunker in the north. I've seen and heard quite a few things, so we'll leave it at that. Anyway, the unrest in Europe has been growing, but the unrest will be completely manageable by the respective authorities. The same cannot be said for your country. The Obama administration has seen this coming, so has staged multiple events to enact gun control. I see the 7,000 fully auto-capable rifles, the IED-resistant tanks with 50 cal gun ports, riot gear, 2 billion rounds of hollow-pointed sniper ammo, Predator drones with Hellfire missiles, and your controllers refusing to talk about it. Trust me when I say, man, I've seen this before, albeit without the drones, thank God. They're ready for when the unrest spreads to the streets of the United States, man. And unlike in Europe, you people have guns. You guys need to do something about it. I'm sorry. And James Holmes is innocent. And thank you guys for mentioning Sandy Hook. Both are as fraudulent as the Yoma bombing. Things are getting serious, buddy.
No, you're absolutely right, and I know we've seen a lot of documentation how a lot of the bombings and events that led to the great unrest in Ireland were being staged by the British government in order to try and keep the people divided against each other and keep them under control.
I'm a big... Well, sorry, keep going, man. I'm sorry.
All right. We understand the U.S. government is preparing to fight a violent revolution, to declare war on the 50 states. You know, it's a worse situation than the Civil War, where Lincoln only had to worry about a few breakaway states. Our current federal government is literally preparing to fight a new war of conquest over the entire set of 50 states, which is why I keep telling my listeners, patience, 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 patience. Do not give the government an excuse to resort to violence, because the government is prepared to win a violent confrontation with the American people. What the U.S. government is unable to deal with, what they're not prepared to deal with, what they cannot survive, is 300 million Americans standing up and saying to the rest of the world, we will not be the wallet of last resort for Wall Street's crimes and corruptions. And the message is getting out. Foreign investment in the United States is already down by 1/3. On the day when the rest of the world understands we will not allow ourselves, or we cannot afford to, cover the losses of Wall Street, all of the rest of the financial investment is going to disappear in a single day. It'll be like the movie Rollover for real life, and it'll all come crashing down. The last thing we want to do is give the government a reason to resort to violence against the American people, but obviously prudence demands we be fully prepared to defend ourselves when the government initiates violence against us. Okay, Nick?
I got one last little point to make.
Okay.
You're totally spot on. I mean, I see your senator this morning questioning, like, okay, what's going on with the bankers? The reason this is all going down is you look even at your attorney general. He's scared to turn up like Philip Marshall, right? He's not going to go anywhere near the banks. It's all the way to the top, man. You do awesome work.
Thank you.
I'll let you go.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And
no sweat, buddy. We love you all over.
Okay. Actually, we're coming up on a break. We're going to hear some words from our sponsors. We got more callers waiting on the line when we come back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I don't claim to be watching it continuously, so I may have missed it. But so far on CNN, I haven't seen a word about Cyprus. But for this entire commercial break, and still going on, they're waxing eloquent over the fact that Jay Leno is leaving The Tonight Show and Jimmy Fallon is taking over. It's all fluff. It's all tabloid. They're trying to keep you distracted. I don't even watch The Tonight Show. I'm in bed long before that. All right, back to the phone. Steve in Florida. Aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Howdy. Yeah, you're right about that. That's not a word about Cyprus. No, I saw a story last week on RT, I believe it was, where in Great Britain they were raising the taxes so much on a glass of beer that thousands and thousands of pubs are going out of business and having to close.
Yep.
And, I got to thinking, there's nightclubs and there's pubs. Basically, the pubs, from what I'm to understand, I've never been there, but the pubs are just maybe you drink a beer or two and, talk to whoever's there. It's just a social thing.
Yeah, it's a neighborhood gathering place.
Exactly. Okay, which we really don't have in the United States that I know of.
Well, we have Twitter, but they don't serve beer.
I'm sorry?
I said we have Twitter, but they don't serve beer.
But no, this is like a person-to-person kind of thing, and somebody you might halfway know or whatever. And it's a place for people to talk and socialize, that kind of thing. Okay. I got to thinking about it immediately. I thought the reason they did it was not for the tax. They raised the money on or taxes on these beers. Like I think it was like 30 or 40%. Okay, and nobody can afford it, so they're all having to close, right? They don't want people talking to each other.
Well, that may be part of it, but in this era of social media, it seems like a very foolish way to go about it. I think it's just the same short-sighted policies we're seeing in every nation with a private central bank, where they're simply raising taxes on everything because they need money now to pay the money junkies, and they're just completely oblivious to the fact that they are collapsing the bottom of the economic pyramid. The working class, if you take away all their money, then they don't have money to go buy beers at the pub. They don't have money to go to Walmart to buy the latest whatever gizmos being imported from China. They don't have money to go down and buy a new car. And it's strangling the future for the sake of keeping the books in the black for today. And it is a very short-sighted policy, and it is doomed to failure. It is the sign of the beginning of the final collapse.
Well, I think it accomplishes two things because, they do get that little bit of extra tax revenue. But then again, it's like people getting together with like minds and saying, well, no, that's not what happened at all. I know what you're...
Yeah. No, it does serve both purposes, but I think in this case it was the fiscal realities that are driving these situations. We're seeing taxes go up on everything. And again, it is a short-sighted policy. Because if you strangle the working class whose labor generates the real wealth of a nation, if you destroy the consumer economy on which the rest of the economy rests, you are doomed. And what we have here...
They cut their own throats.
Yeah, they really are. Wall Street's trying to game the system to drag the wealth to themselves, but there's no new wealth coming into the system because all the high-paying jobs went to other countries. And what little we've got left is being taxed away. And it is. I see it as the early harbinger of the final collapse.
Well, that's all I had for you, Mike. I wish there was a way we could get together, like-minded people, and discuss things and so forth. But your show's like the next best thing.
Well, thank you very much. But again, in the era of social media, there's a lot more person-to-person communication going on. And, I understand the allure of the pubs, and I've been to Great Britain, and I went to a pub just to see what the experience was. And we even had a British-style pub in North Hollywood, Buchanan's, that we used to go to all over all the time, get the fish and chips and the Watney's Red Barrel and the Cornish pasties, and we had a really good time, and I really enjoyed the place. And so I understand exactly what the allure is, and I'm sorry that they're being driven out of business. But businesses are being driven out of business by high taxation, completely gratuitous regulatory compliance, and of course the consumers, the customers, are being taxed into poverty where they're not buying much of anything more than their rent, their mortgage payment, food, and gas, and that's it. And everything else, the luxuries, including a night at the pub, they're being put on hold. Okay?
Oh yeah. And they don't want people complaining about anything or agreeing.
No, they don't.
With anybody.
That's why they're reading your emails and everything. All right, we got to let you go. We're coming up on the end of a break here. I'm going to go to Ed in Connecticut, but Ed, we're about 15 seconds away from a commercial break, so I'm going to have to bring you back after the commercials. But just sort of tease us with what you want to talk about.
Well, basically, I checked with a few banks locally that I have friends with here, and I have asked them about what we were talking about earlier, and they haven't heard anything about this taking money out only to $1,000 limit.
Okay, well, that's good. That's good to know, and thank you for the information. We got to take a break for commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to the phones. Jim in Georgia. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. And I've tried to write this down and make it as short as possible. I know you were telling people to save coins and silver and that. And what I've done is a penny from 1982 and back is 90% copper. A nickel is only 75% copper and 25% nickel. Any silver coins from 1964 and back were 90% silver, except for the war nickels from 42 to 45. So they don't need to save any of them coins. I mean, it'd be a waste of your money because the only silver coins that are made now are made especially for the mint, like the Silver Eagle is 1 ounce.
Well, let's go back on that a little tiny bit here, okay? Prior to 1964, in fact, let's go all the way back to when the nation was started. The silver content was the money. The silver dollar had $1 worth of silver in it. They added additional metals to make it more durable. They didn't want it wearing out as it was going from pocket to pocket.
90%.
Yeah, but it had $1 worth of silver in there. So those pre-1964 coins do have the face value's worth of silver as it was back in 1964. The reason for saving those pre-1964 coins is because it is a recognized unit of exchange. And it doesn't matter whether it's all silver or not. Everybody knows that it has silver in there at 90%. Long after the Roman Empire fell, their coinage was still an accepted medium of exchange throughout the world because the Roman coins were made out of bronze and silver and in some cases gold. And because the coin was the money, it didn't need Rome to exist to have value. It continued as a medium of exchange. And the same applies to all of the U.S. coins before 1964. And I know there's some other dates for some of the other coinage. They will be usable as mediums of exchange, and without needing the U.S. government to be there and back it up. In contrast, all of our current coinage and the Federal Reserve note are absolutely worthless pieces of junk. Their value is simply what the Federal Reserve has taught us to believe that they are. And with the collapse of the Federal Reserve, that belief system will also collapse. If you want 100% pure silver and gold, go over to Republic Trading Group, and they'll set you up. But if you are able to acquire some of the junk silver, the pre-1964 U.S. coinage, it is still going to be usable as a medium of exchange while we go through that period of confusion following the collapse of the Federal Reserve and the establishment of a new United States government and a new United States-owned central bank and a new currency based on value.
Based on today's price, silver is, if you buy it from a dealer, would be $34 an ounce. I deal in this, okay?
Yep.
Sell it to a dealer would be $29, so there's $4 difference.
Well, yeah, that's how the dealer makes their profit. That's the straddle.
Yeah.
But the point is, following the collapse of the Federal Reserve, it won't matter how much that silver coin is worth in U.S. Federal Reserve notes because they won't exist anymore. People will probably start thinking of them in terms of this is a 25-cent piece, this is a 5-cent piece, this is a 10-cent piece. We will have lost that whole overstructure of what is this really worth in dollars because the real worth is going to be the coin, not whatever it was arbitrarily worth in now worthless Federal Reserve notes.
Right. But what I'm trying to say is that people are going to say the only nickel that was worth any silver was from 1942 to 1945, and that was 35% silver because of the war effort. They needed the nickel for the war effort, okay? But that was the only nickel that had silver in it, except when you go back to 1804 and back. Then they had the real silver in coins.
Yeah, but as you say, nickel has inherent worth. Copper has inherent worth. Especially now, I mean, copper prices are going right through the roof. Those copper pennies have worth. And so it doesn't...
50 pennies make a pound, right.
It doesn't necessarily have to be a silver coin or a gold coin to be a medium of exchange as long as it's made of something people understand has intrinsic worth. Nickel, copper, whatever. Because they are well known... Because they're well known, following the collapse of the Federal Reserve, they will make a temporary medium of exchange so that commerce can continue while we work on the blueprint for the new America.
That's when the Federal Reserve went to hell, when the Federal Reserve, 1964, took our money and made it worthless as far as coinage.
Yes.
Just worthless.
That is, by the way, a death... That is, by the way, a death penalty offense under the Coinage Act of 1792. To debase the currency. Yeah. Okay?
Thank you, Michael.
All right, thanks a lot, Jim. We're going to let you go here. We're coming up on the end of the show. I got a couple more things to talk about. And interestingly enough, we were talking earlier about this chemical weapons attack that supposedly happened earlier in the week. And the Free Syria Army, 95% of whom are not Syrian, they're hired mercenaries, and the U.S. government was saying, Assad did it, Assad did it, Assad did it. Horrible, horrible, horrible. Well, then, of course, it came out that 16 of Assad's own troops were killed in this chemical attack, which made it obvious it came from the United States proxy army. And now the U.S. is backing off and saying, we don't think the attack happened at all. It's just a hoax. It's a fraud. We, the United States of America, and our hired mercenaries would never use chemical weapons. So they're already having to backpedal from this thing. Meanwhile, Representative Mike Rogers, the same Mike Rogers who we were talking about earlier, says, now's the time to act in Syria. Great, let's put Rogers on a plane and ship him over there. Now he's out there assuring Americans that there are no Americans on Obama's drone kill list. That might be true right now, this very second, when you've got your trap open there, Mike. But that's not a guarantee that starting tomorrow, Americans will not go on that list. They're just trying to get Americans to adapt, to accommodate, to go along with this idea that the president has some kind of legal, moral right or authority to kill people at will anywhere on planet Earth, and he does not under the Constitution. Meanwhile, the United States Justice Department is considering rewriting the laws to allow police to read your emails without warrants. We're not even talking FBI, CIA, federal government, anti-terror forces. Now they're talking about ordinary police. The cop on the beat is now going to be allowed to look at your emails without a warrant. Now, they're attempting to sell this to the public as acceptable because apparently the email has to have already been delivered, which they can tell electronically from the ISP, and it must be older than 6 months. That seems rather absurd. I think that's Coco Chanel's feather that'll be discarded at the last second when the legislation moves forward, because allowing the police to read your email from 6 months ago seems pointless in this high-speed day and age. The world is changing so rapidly that your correspondence from 6 months ago is worthless, other than as a fishing expedition to find old offenses with which to silence present-day opponents. Certainly this is worthless in the context of thwarting crimes being planned for the immediate future. And that tells us that that 6-month restriction will vanish as soon as it becomes law. Interesting little story over at West Point. A housekeeper at the West Point Academy is in legal trouble with the federal authorities for trying to steal a bag of frozen meatballs from the mess hall before dinner. By golly, we're going to prove we're on top of crime in this country. I mean, the Federal Reserve can run a 100-year-old Ponzi scheme. Wall Street can pull off the mortgage-backed securities fraud. Banks can pull out the foreclosure fraud. Government does nothing. But by golly, if you steal a bag of frozen meatballs, you are in deep kimchi. So you remember what this nation is and how it works. Be a banker, you're fine. Steal a meatball because you're hungry, you're in big trouble there, Buster. Now, over in the Daily Mail, they're reporting that we're coming up in Great Britain on a white weekend. They're expecting another major winter snowstorm, 3 inches of snow, 65-mile-per-hour winds, blizzards. This is officially spring, isn't it, Mr. Gore? Who back in 2009 repeated the oft-made claim that snow would be a thing of the past. So far, because we're not out of the month yet, we have another 10 days to go, this is the second coldest March on record since 1969. Because they're expecting more cooling, this could turn out to be the coldest March in the last 44 years. Meanwhile, remember how they caught the carbon Nazis going into Wikipedia and trying to rewrite the history of the Roman and medieval warming periods to make them look not quite so warm and not quite so beneficial? Apparently, British Petroleum has been caught trying to rewrite the environmental record on Wikipedia as well. British Petroleum has been caught rewriting 44% of the pages about itself and its environmental impact. Wikipedia is not trustworthy anyway. They used to have articles at Wikipedia about whatreallyhappened.com and Michael Rivero. And then they were altered to basically accuse me of anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial and all the rest of it. And I went back in and honestly corrected the quotes that were out of context. I didn't get into saying, you're completely nonsense and stuff. I went back in and there were some outright misstatements that I corrected, and I left everything else intact. Next day, the misstatements were back in. I went in to correct them. I was locked out on the theory from Wikipedia that Michael Rivero is not considered an authoritative source on the subject of Michael Rivero. That's Wikipedia. When I made that public, Wikipedia purged themselves of any reference to myself and my website, and I haven't bothered with Wikipedia since then. Now, over in Great Britain, again from the Daily Mail, Asda Foods has discovered that their budget corned beef, their own brand, is now 50% horse. The world is running out of food to feed the human population. Between GMO disasters, the poisoning of the Gulf of Mexico, the poisoning of the North Pacific from Fukushima, the diversion of food production farmlands to ethanol production, we've run out of food. Now they're grabbing at the horses. Next it'll be the dogs. I'll be upset about that. I'm rather fond of dogs. Now there is a little good piece of news. As you know, there's this genetically modified salmon coming onto the market. Now it's not really salmon. It's a splice between two breeds of salmon and an eel. Call it Loxzilla. Apparently, a number of the U.S. supermarket chains are going to boycott this product. There are already serious concerns about its safety to eat. The FDA is approving it because the FDA is saying that, yes, there are some health hazards associated with eating this genetically modified salmon, but it is of less seriousness than a control substance they consider the benchmark for toxicity. What is the control substance they're using as the benchmark for safety? Aspartame, the bioweapon turned sweetener that is linked to symptoms that mimic Parkinson's disease, that is linked to an increase in diabetes, that if it is not stored correctly breaks down into methyl alcohol and formaldehyde. It's just incredibly reckless what's going on out there. You need to all get some vegetable seeds and get a garden going right now. It's in the spring. This is planting season. Get your survival gardens going. Get your home victory garden, whatever you want to call it. Buy a bunch of vegetable seeds and just throw them all over any open space. Guerrilla gardening. If everybody's throwing out seeds and food is growing everywhere and nobody owns it, everybody gets fed, including the homeless and hungry. What's it going to cost you, a package of non-GMO seeds? Please don't get the GMO seeds. We're risking the entire biosphere with these genetically modified crops. We're risking an extinction-level event. If that epicite gene that the U.S. Department of Agriculture paid to have put into corn breaks into the wild, into all the corn, we're looking at a major human population die-off. I'm sure the money junkies would love that. They've got all the money. Now they just want to get rid of all of us stinky, extra, useless eaters. Turn the entire planet into a new Disneyland with a total population of the top 1% richest people glaring at each other and wondering how they can take money from each other. Because they won't be happy. They can't be. The money junkies can't be happy because they're addicts. And as I've said many, many times before, and we're seeing this in Cyprus right now, having private bankers in charge of your nation's economy makes no more sense than having drug addicts in charge of your pharmacies. After a while, everything's being solved with placebos. Placebo money. That's what the Federal Reserve note is. It's not real money. It's a placebo currency. All righty. Let's see. We're coming up on our last commercial break here. They're making a big deal about Jodi Arias, the woman who killed her significant other, and is claiming she doesn't remember the actual attack. They're now saying she has post-traumatic stress disorder. What is the normal medication prescribed for post-traumatic stress disorder? SSRIs, prescription antidepressants. Why is her lawyer not bringing this up? Anyway, they're now finding stronger doses of statins increase the risk of kidney damage by 1/3. That whole Hippocratic principle of first of all, do no harm has been abandoned. Medicine is being sold saying, we think this will do you more good than harm. It'll do you harm, but we think it'll be better for you. And if it harms you, we've got another medication to sell you. We talked about this earlier in the week. More and more parents are refusing HPV vaccinations for their children. The press is out there saying, you're just imagining that there's harm and harm. No, there isn't. There's a lot of well-documented cases of girls being given this shot and suffering permanent, irreparable medical damage. To protect them against a virus they have a less than 0.1% chance of ever encountering. It's all about the money, and human life and health and safety just isn't a factor to the money junkies. Going to be back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And CNN is back on Obama and Israel and how we must love and support Israel and give them our weapons and our money and the lives of our children because they're, after all, Israel. And if you don't agree, you're a filthy anti-Semite, Nazi lover, whatever here. Now, getting back to the situation over parents starting to really dig their heels in over these HPV vaccinations. And the corporate media and the pharmaceutical companies are saying they're safe. It's just a conspiracy theory that these are harmful. We would never, ever, ever, ever sell you anything that was harmful. And if we do, we've got a medication to fix it. But there is now a new study out that confirms that contrary to the claims by the manufacturer that the Gardasil vaccine does not contain any viral DNA, the Gardasil vaccine does, in fact, contain HPV-11, HPV-16, and HPV-18L1 DNA firmly attached to Merck's proprietary aluminum adjuvant. And even just the aluminum adjuvant is a potential problem. Your body is not supposed to have aluminum in your body, in your bloodstream. Just like it's not supposed to have peanut oil. As of the latest numbers, 1 out of every 50 school-age children in the United States of America has some degree of autism. 1 out of 50. Before this rampage of vaccination, became the new marketing cry of the pharmaceutical industries. We didn't have that much of a problem with autism. It was rare. And it was linked to mercury preservatives. They were going to be banned, then all of a sudden they canceled the ban. The UN wants to ban thimerosal. The pharmaceutical industry is out there, so you can't do that. This is one of our greatest medications out there. It's making people sick, and once they're sick, we can make money off of them forever. 1 out of 50. Do you realize how much of our future is being destroyed this way? What if that 1 out of 50 children left unchemically molested was going to go on and find a new source of clean, cheap energy that would revolutionize the world? What if that 1 in 50 children, if their brain wasn't fried with all these chemicals? Because we're the most vaccinated population on Earth right now. What if that 1 in 50 children, if their brain wasn't destroyed by these chemicals, was going to go on to become a leader of the world that would bring peace to us? We need to go back to that principle of medicine. First of all, do no harm. I hear the music. It's time for us to get out of here. And we'll be back here tomorrow, Friday, on the Republic Broadcasting Network. So until then, stay safe. Keep yourself fully informed. Make good choices. Share what you know with who you know. Please support Republic Broadcasting. And again, good time to get into silver and gold. Republic Trading Group. Aloha, America.